Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hop-Ons podcast, a community review podcast sponsored by our Patreon supporters. My name is Colin Cox.
I can't count the reasons I should stay. Colin, it's me, John. Good evening. One last go around the community college. One last stroll through before we burn that motherfucker to the ground, huh?
We're here to take our final exams, I suppose. John, we are here to discuss Season 6, Episode 13 of Community, Emotional Consequences of Broadcast Television. But, John, a couple of things before we start. We have, inexplicably...
Oh, my God.
2 new patrons.
Yeah, they're trying to get in there at the last second. I feel you. I feel you. 2 new
John,
patrons.
Yes.
A-Rod? Is that one of them? Yeah. Alex Rodriguez?
Every member of the 1999 New York Yankees, they've all become patrons at
oh
this
my
point.
God.
It's amazing. Yeah. No, John, we would like to welcome another John and Ira. So John and Ira are
Ira Glass.
patrons.
He heard the episode we did the Ira Glass thing. He loved it.
It was strange because it was actually the Patreon episode where we did that, but somehow he heard it.
Ira, thank you. And John.
John
Good,
and
that's
Ira.
That is a fantastic name. Thank you for having it. From me,
and,
other John.
Yes, from other John. And we've spoken about this, I suppose, before we close tonight. We'll talk about our schedule. This is not the final episode. We want to record a few more, and we're thinking we might record a few additional episodes and make those Patreon exclusives for the month of June. So we'll still be around for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, even after the podcast is over, we're not just dead. Like, we will be around. We're not just going to die. I hope. I don't know. Fuck, now I've said that. I've final destinationed myself. Anyway, thank you, Ira and John, for the support. We do appreciate you.
Thank
immensely.
you, Ira and John. Yeah, and I guess if you want to support the podcast, the Patreon link's in the show notes.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, you have a month and a half to get in there, get the bonus content before it floats away forever.
Indeed. Yeah, indeed. John, so speaking of the future of the podcast, I believe successfully pitched you, and I'm still taking interviews from VCs, but I believe I've successfully pitched you on the idea that we should transition the podcast into an AI technology company where you're the Wozniak and I'm the Jobs. Now,
Correct.
I had an idea a couple of days ago as the Jobs of this endeavor. So I really now I can't eat a lot of ice cream as a diabetic, but I really like drumsticks. Do you like drumsticks?
I love a drumstick.
Okay.
I love a drumstick.
What's your and we haven't spoken about this before. What's your favorite part of the drumstick?
It's the tip, the cone tip.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's my favorite part too. The end, right? Okay. So here's my idea. We need to find a way just to manufacture those parts of the drumstick. So everything
is this a
else
Seinfeld
can go.
thing? Are we in a Seinfeld episode?
Although this does seem inspired by the Muffin Top episode,
it does, yes.
right? Yeah. No, this was not necessarily, not a good idea to say you were inspired by Jerry Seinfeld these days. But no, John, my idea basically is we need to find a way to manufacture these bottoms. So basically what I did, seamlessly using our AI technology, I created some images and some pitches for directions we could take this new venture. So John, if you would please, I just sent you an email. I would love for you to respond to these 2 images. These are 2 possibilities, directions we could take this new venture.
Well, I'm checking my email. Are you sure you sent it to the right email address?
Boy, let's hope so.
Don't say it out loud. I don't want to get any terrible emails.
Send it to you
from people
right now.
I'm
there should be 2 images.
The spam and see it's not there. So let me refresh the browser. Here it is. All right, proposal.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the second one is great. This first one is not the best. The first one, for those of you that don't know, a drumstick, and I think they have them overseas. They're called cornetos overseas. Anyway, here in America,
Yeah.
They're a cone, like a waffle cone,
Yeah.
that has the worst tasting ice cream imaginable in it.
Terrible.
They cover it with a chocolate hard shell.
Yeah.
Nuts they normally have like a caramel center, which is great. But then at the bottom tip of the cone is just pure chocolate with this waffle cone. So Colin's first pitch is it's called Hardy Bottoms. And then you've just put this cool sort of bottoms up as the catchphrase, which I think is great.
Thank you.
It's fantastic. But now the next one is going to win. And I just saw the whole picture.
I can put these on Patreon. Again, seamlessly using our AI technology to create these images. Yeah, no, John, the second one.
No, I'll go ahead. I'll say it.
Yeah, you say it.
Now this is a picture of we've called the product Lil Knobbers. Lil Knobbers. And then the catchphrase, which I think is great, by the way, polish off that knob. And then you've taken a picture of me, the picture you use all the time, constantly, and you have put what essentially is like, it's a real sort of horrific animated face that you've put on me for Lil Knobbers. So,
yeah.
I'm actually a little excited the podcast is ending.
John,
anyway.
Lil Knobbers. Doesn't that sound great?
Lil Knobbers is great. Fucking 10 out of 10.
Yeah. So this is fantastic for us because it allows us to move in exciting new directions while seamlessly integrating our AI technology into these new ventures.
So this is your season 7 pitch of the podcast.
Precisely.
We would have like a fucking awful ice cream cone company called Lil Knobbers. We would be in business for approximately a week because our tagline would be polish off that knob. Although, I say that, but in America, do you remember like the Big Johnson shirts?
Exactly.
Where it was like women with like their breasts out.
Oh.
And it was like the back of it was like, take care of your Johnson, and it was like a bunch of dick jokes.
Oh,
I think this would succeed actually in America. We're that stupid. I think it would do pretty good.
And I'm not laboring under some delusion that this is my only great idea. Again, as the jobs of this podcast, I'm convinced, and as the jobs of this new venture, I'm convinced that this is just the beginning of a series of spectacular ideas. Now, it's your responsibility to find a way to manufacture all of this as the Wozniak of this venture, but I trust you could do that. So
you've made the pitch, and now I have to come up with all the manufacturing and production. I quit. I'm going to quit. I don't want to do it.
Well, I'm a bit disappointed.
See, that's the wild card that you didn't see coming.
Well, but I'm confident
I don't need Lil Knobbers.
Well, but you said you enjoyed it. You said it was your favorite part. I think the thing we've discovered is everyone's favorite part is getting a mouthful of a Little Knobbers.
Okay. That's the first commercial. It works so well. Anyway,
it does.
Let's talk about the series finale.
Oh, sure.
Of Community. And
I
I
might
guess
put
for
these
the
images on
fucking
Patreon.
last time ever.
I might put these images on Patreon.
Please do.
Should I do
would
that?
love for everyone to see how fucking awful I look. Colin, please, for the last time in the history of the world, play the Barker Bite song.
Well, John, we'll get to that. We'll get to the information later. I think that's fine. Yeah, no, before we take this old girl out back.
Okay. Oh, Jesus Christ.
John Barker Bait.
Okay.
This biggity boy's a diggity dog.
Now, I don't know. Do we actually say who wrote, and do we actually go through that? Did you skip all that?
Well, that's why I said I can provide that information later. Directed by Rob Schraub, written by Chris McKenna and Dan Harmon. John, your IMDb plot summary. As their 6th year at Greendale draws to a close, Abed asks everyone to imagine pitching a TV show about what they would do in season 7. So, John, before we need to put her down,
Okay.
does she bark her
I
bags?
hate all this verbiage.
Yeah,
This
that's fair.
is okay. If this wasn't a series finale, it would bite, but because it is, I think it barks. It's fine. I don't think it has any. I think there are a couple moments that have some emotional heft to them, but I am honestly shocked that this is the series finale of this show. I think it moves at like a breakneck speed.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of things are jammed in here that probably don't need to be. I was fine with it, but I don't think. I'm glad that we're getting a movie because I don't think this is the finale that the show deserved.
Interesting. I've always really liked it. I think it's interesting, especially when thinking about it, because like you and I both know this. We've watched enough television to know the series finale has a particular tone. It has a particular pace. It typically does things that one might argue the show cannot do in a proper episode, but it seems as if it has the permission to do it in the finale because, hey, what will they do? Like, not renew the show? This is it, right? But what I think I like about this episode is it doesn't do the sorts of things that I necessarily expect, and I suspect I'm not the first person to say this. It does things that I don't suspect many people would anticipate from a series or season finale. It's interesting, this idea, looking forward to imagine what this show could be and allowing, in particular, Jeff's pitches to function as a narrative arc for this episode. I think that's incredibly interesting because typically when I think about series finales, I think about episodes that do a lot of wish fulfillment that might seem inconsistent with the sorts of narratives and the sorts of arcs the show has constructed to that point. I think there's even this moment when Annie says something like, maybe this is Jeff's first or second fantasy, but I want to argue it's almost like a pitch. She says, why would the audience like it that I commute from Virginia back to Colorado? Wouldn't they feel sorry for me? And in a moment like that, I think about a show like Friends, where when Rachel decides in the series finale not to take that job in Paris, I think, and instead stay in New York with Ross, who would want that? Like, if you pause and think about it for a second, don't you feel sorry for that character? That she don't you feel sorry for her that this person who I guess has romantic feelings for her only now decided to say something, and that she, for contrived reasons, decides to accept? I feel nothing but pity for this person. So I think by doing the episode the way they do it, they definitely allow us to see these distinct possibilities of directions where they could take this final episode. Like, I don't know, finally jumping the shark and allowing Jeff and Annie to, codify this relationship. Well, it's interesting because the episode gets to have it both ways, where through these fantasies and through these pitches, we get to see that, but it's not something that actually happens. So I think this is a fascinating way to end a series because it allows us to see those moments that would and probably should never happen, but it doesn't actually happen. So they're able to maintain some fidelity to the character arcs and the larger narratives they've told throughout, not just this season, but really the show. And I don't know, I think that's why I really dig it.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't disagree with you. I think a lot of that is interesting, and I think it really shines a light on the insecurities of Jeff, which I like. I think that's good. Anytime that we get to do that, I think Joel McHale as an actor succeeds when he gets to have that sort of emotional range. I think the way that the episode is structured, some things feel out of place, and it cheapens a lot of the emotional weight, especially Jeff's final dream with all like the young women sitting around the table.
Yeah.
That is in the worst possible place that it could be. I think there are other pitches, quote unquote, he could have there. That one is just not great. And I think even as a joke, it makes me almost dislike Jeff a little bit because he
Sure.
hasn't really done this in a while, and it's just interesting. I also think the group hug stuff with Chang is so not it's not great at all. It really cheapens that as well. I think that moment in the study group in the study room, excuse me, when Jeff says, "I really love I got to be with you guys." That could have been done much more. And I guess maybe this is where Community, prides itself as being different and subverting expectations. But I think at that point we don't really want that. I want I want this to be sappy, and for me to like have my heartstrings pulled, and then Chang making fart jokes and also saying he's gay over and over is like, what are you doing? What is this for? Who is this for? It's not funny. This is not a moment we're laughing at. So yeah, I think structure wise it has some problems, and also I think it is, like I said, it's just breakneck. You don't really have a chance to stop and take in anything that's happening. So yeah, I think that's it. I don't really know how you want to talk about this episode. If you want to go through it beat by beat or just highlight it, however you feel.
Yeah, no, I just quickly, I would agree with you though. Like, I think all of your concerns about this episode make complete sense to me because I think there is a distinct pacing problem here. I am curious if part of the reason why this episode feels like, I would argue all series finales feel equally inconsistently paced. Like, I can't think of a series finale where I thought, because think about what the series finale must do. It cannot just be an episode. It needs to have all of these other concerns and preoccupations that I think fundamentally distort the pacing. So I agree with you, but I would argue this is more, again, this is one of those situations where it's not the content of the episode that you're responding to, it's the form the episode takes that you're responding to.
Sure.
And I think your response, again, is fair because this is something I think Ryan Ingley from this podcast called Why Theory, which I really like. He's a media and television scholar, I think at Pomona College in California. But he actually wrote a really cool essay about Community's bottle episodes. And this is something that I've heard him speak about as well, is endings are always hard because the thing that really animates us with stories, it's never the ending. Because think about what the ending signifies. It's the end of a kind of conflict, or at the very least, the end of a larger conflict that really drives the narrative. And it's that conflict. And this is something that I talk to my students about often, the idea that conflict really drives narratives. This is why, for example, in the original Star Wars film, once Luke destroys the Death Star, I mean, I don't know if there's a line of dialogue after that. It's just Luke, Han, and Leia embrace in the hangar, and then there's the medal ceremony, and that's it, because what else is there? And that is, by comparison to the rest of the film, an incredibly clumsy set of minutes and moments because there's no conflict. So I think that's part of what makes the end of series, in particular series like this, where the thing that really propels things forward is this seriality, is the continuation. I don't know, like, find me a great final episode to a show. I think people often have problems with all of them. And I don't think, again, it's because of the content of those episodes. I think it's the form the episodes take and the awareness as the audience that we're watching the final one. But I agree with you. I think there is a question of pacing. I think you're absolutely right. I don't even necessarily want to talk about the Chang hug situation because that feels like a moment where they just refuse to commit to a feeling, even though this is a show that's often committed to those kinds of saccharine feelings. So why not commit to it here? But no, I think the best way, John, to move through this is to maybe just talk about everyone's pitches, and then maybe we could have a conversation about Jeff's pitches and how those create a kind of narrative arc for this character. So Abed's pitch, if I remember correctly, Shirley's back because his idea was we need something to help return us to formula. And the thing to do that is Shirley. And then I guess the dean at the end is just wearing a diaper and he's just standing there. Abed's pitch, well, it makes a bit of sense to me. This idea that by having Shirley return, and he seems to understand exactly how jokes, humor, and character dynamics work within this group. The idea that Britta is blissfully unaware, which is part of what makes her incredibly funny. The idea that like Shirley has this reactionary response to almost anything and everything new, that makes a kind of sense. So again, like Abed seems to understand this is less about the content of what they say and more about the form that their dialogue takes. But I don't know. Like I think Abed's is funnily enough the most conservative of all of them to me.
Yeah, he's the most concerned about like fan service. He's the most like
Okay.
like if like the MCU had a finale, this is sort of what
Okay.
you would get, where you bring back like the fan favorite and then you just reset. That's what you're doing. You're resetting here in hopes that we make more money and we can go forward. And this is what the audience wants to see.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we reset. I think you and I had a lot of issues with the Arrested Development finale.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, because season 5 was like all over the fucking place. But the very end of that finale was a reset of the whole thing. You know, because we spoke at length about George Michael and Michael driving in the wrong direction back to everybody else.
Yeah, left.
Yeah. And I think that is, even though that finale's bad, I think that could be a comfort to fans because in some type of mindset we have made, okay, well, we know the Bluths are going to keep doing the Bluth thing and we're cool with that. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I think Abed's is the safest play. As you said, the most conservative play. And as someone who is steeped in media, it makes the most sense.
And it's the one that seems to labor under some delusion that there was a moment when this show was this show. As if, like, again, I think you and I have spoken about this as well. The idea that, like, there's ever a moment when, I don't know, you could identify an episode and say, that's when the show was the show. But what's funny about that is it's always understood retroactively. That's never, I can't think of a time, like, find me anyone, like, whomever would say, like, let us imagine that, like, Community was at its best at this point in season 2. I wonder if that's how people responded to it at the time, because I sincerely doubt they did. Again, these sorts of things. It's funny because Abed's right. These things only happen retroactively, right? The idea that the show has lost its formula is something you can only understand in retrospect. So I think I like what you said, John, this idea that Abed's pitch is the one that the fans would probably find the most attractive because it is one that tries to return to some mythic past as if that ever existed. That's really good.
Yeah. And then we move on to the Dean. Oh, also we should say we get 2 F-bombs in this episode, which was so off-putting. It was so fucking weird to see.
Was it? Okay.
I when the first time the Dean said it, I went, excuse, I had to rewind it. I thought I'd misheard. But yeah, so then we get the Dean's pitch, which is by and far the best pitch. It's fucking hilarious. The Dean is trying his best to be not racist while simultaneously being the most racist person alive.
Fantastic.
Because Abed says, would you have Abed or Shirley? And the Dean says, why do we have to choose? We can have both of them. And so every character at the table talks like the Dean, which I love.
Yeah.
Except for except for Shirley and Elroy, who are the most stereotypical black. At one point they say like hallelujah, church, amen. You said it, girl.
If you pay attention, what's really funny is it's, at least I have the impression that because he clearly thinks all black people sound a certain way, he has Elroy say something that I think he clearly wanted Shirley to say, and he has Shirley say something that he clearly wanted Elroy to say.
Yeah,
but and then you have like this like zombie black person.
Yeah, I was gonna say we should add a third black person who was just this like David Lynchian zombie that sits in the corner and just stares which is it's actually quite horrifying, the photography of it. But the Dean's pitch is really quite funny.
Yeah.
And that's all it is just him trying to be PC, but also being insanely racist.
Yeah,
as well.
which is something like this is really consistent with this character. The idea that, and what I really like about this, again, this idea that what it means to be anti-racist is just to have one token black character. Like, basically, it's just like token black characters all the way down. This is the best way to fight racism. And it's fascinating because at no point does he interrogate these assumptions that just having more black people around a predominantly white space will make it less racist. No, that's not how this works at all.
Not at all. Yeah.
But I do like this idea. It's like, let's just flood this space with either black people who, as you said, look like these zombified Lynchian figures, or they all sound like, again, magical Negro figures. That's racial progress for the Dean, and it's fascinating. Yeah,
that's what he has created, and it's not the best. I don't even know who's after that. Is Chang's after that?
Okay, so, dude, Chang's pitch is next.
Yeah,
and the guy. So, is this the guy who got canceled? Who does the voice?
Oh, who is the guy that does the voice?
It's one of the Rick and Morty guys.
Oh, is it? Then
I think so.
It would have to be. I don't know his name.
I don't know his name
the
either.
Ice Cube guy who eats cell phones, that
Ice
shit made
Cube
me
head.
laugh a lot, by the way.
Ice Cube head.
When he says, I eat cell phones, so don't keep them near me, I just could not stop laughing.
Yeah,
it's so stupid.
Where I'm from, they taste like prime rib, and he has a gun that shoots all their unhappiness away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's Chang's. That's it. I don't know what you want. That's all it is. It's fucking bad.
What? I mean, okay, so Ice Cream Head, interesting.
The Ice Cube Head guy? Well, it's because...
Ice Cube Head, not Ice Cream. I was thinking about the drumstick thing.
You're
it's
thinking
Ice
about Lil
Cube
Knobbers,
Head.
yeah.
I was thinking about Lil Knobbers. Yeah, no, yeah.
It always just pops up.
That would be great. We should probably try to develop a Little Knobbers character.
No, you can find out. Jeff even says, good job on the improv with the Ice Cube, because he was just looking at his drink. But my favorite part about that whole thing is at the end of his pitch, for no reason whatsoever, the Dean runs in a diaper and starts dancing. And then when it cuts back to real life, the Dean is just standing behind Chang, doing the same dance.
Yeah. No, this is...
It's great.
It is an interesting little moment, the idea that all Chang wants is, I guess, a gun that makes people happy. Like, is this not the perfect metaphor for this character? That he is basically an unrelenting firearm that desperately tries to make people happy.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's been through it, really. He's the most sort of Shakespearean tragic character in this show, the things this man has gone through. There's even a moment in the show where I thought it was like quite sad, actually, is when Jeff's pitch where he tries to convince them all to stay, and Chang is teaching math, and he says, I like your pitch because I seem like a very pleasant, normal person.
I seem grounded, relatable, and pleasant.
Yeah, there we go. And I thought, well, that's quite sad that that's all this guy's ever wanted. So, and we'll get to that pitch, but let's talk about Frankie's, I guess.
Britta's is technically
Britta's is next.
It's like what, like Chernobyl or something is how it's.
We're like, I mean, the school looks like it's like in an oil rig that's been blown up or something on a barge. Yeah. And the theme song is done by like Nick Cave or something, and it just sounds awful. And Britta drops the other F-bomb here. Yeah. Because now the community college, I think, in her pitch is like a country or something. I don't know. And
it seems like an independent nation. Like this is also meant to feel like The Wire, maybe, or something. And so the dean has, the framing here. I'm not all that other stuff. I'm transgendered. That's the Dean in Britta's show.
That's a pretty fucked up moment in
Yeah.
the show also.
Fair. Yeah.
That's not a very good shining light for the show. That one I found to be quite offensive. Not as much as the Chang gay joke, but that one was pretty bad. But yes, so she's trying to, I guess, like assume the gender identity of the Dean.
Well, yeah, or just assume it's again, it's one of those interesting moments where, John, the pitch does the work of reading Britta more so than it does anything else, because what it suggests is Britta clearly wants to conflate, I suppose, having non-exclusively heteronormative sexual preferences to, I guess, just being transgendered, or it implies that if you're someone who's interested in a gender presentation that doesn't fit within a binary, well, clearly you're just trans. It is fascinating how it tracks with a lot of the trans fear-mongering that we see today. And again, it comes from a character who is nominally the most progressive character on the show. So I think that, like, again, intentionality irrelevant, but I do think it's interesting how for Britta, the goal is, let's just make this simple and digestible instead of confronting how uncomfortable the Dean might make certain, liberal-minded individuals.
Yeah, and it ends with the Dean getting quite offended by the pitch, and then we move on to, and I didn't like that one. That one didn't really make me laugh at all. But we get.
I think that's
Frankie's.
actually what I just quickly. I think that's the thing I like about it so much is that Britta wants to make this show like gritty, dramatic, prestige television from like the mid-aughts or something. Like that's all she
like
wants.
a thermonuclear drama.
Yeah,
that no one cares about.
No one cares about. No one would watch this show. Yeah.
No, not at all. I can't even remember what Frankie's is. It's very. I know the theme song is very lovely. It's like a lovely classical piano music.
Yeah.
But I can't remember what she makes her pitch.
Well, it's because it's nothing. It's because Frankie, in a lovely little, like, moment of comeuppance, and she's a character who has consistently said she doesn't own a television, yet in her hubris she implies that, well, how hard is doing this? And so then her pitch is just everyone sitting politely at a table, no conflict to speak of whatsoever.
Oh, yeah.
And they all just robotically say hello. And then I think at one point Frankie says, and I know that's not enough, so she does this hand gesture.
Like a come on, and Chang farts. Yeah.
And Chang farts. And then I believe he says, and so on. And that's all of her pitch.
Yeah. That's it. That's the pitch.
Thoughts about the pitch.
Great.
Thoughts about the pitch.
Not good. Not a good pitch. Not my favorite pitch I've seen.
It's very funny, though. Yeah.
The worst pitch, if I had to rank them.
Yeah.
Well, no. I think Britta's is my least favorite. Frankie's at least has a fart joke, and I don't care who you are. That's funny right there.
I would still rather watch Britta's because at least things seem to happen in Britta's pitch.
It'd be more interesting, sure.
Yeah.
For absolutely.
No, Frankie, like, again, clearly doesn't understand how storytelling works, which doesn't surprise me because she reads Ayn Rand. But it's not surprising to me that, like...
And so...
It's just
I can't remember Jeff's first pitch.
Yeah, we can go back to Jeff. So his first pitch, it is because all of his have just blended together in my mind. What is his first pitch? I genuinely don't remember.
It's before Annie announces she's leaving for.
Or isn't it immediately after? Because that's the thing that really necessitates Jeff
all right, well,
staying.
then if it's
and
immediately after, it's like the pitch where everybody stays.
Yeah.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
It's not. Yeah.
It's not.
Oh, no, Jeff's first pitch is the one where Annie commutes from Virginia.
Okay. And he's like, you can finish your classes here.
Yeah.
She's like, they have classes in Quantico. I can't remember that pitch. It's obviously not very memorable.
Well, but the thing that's memorable about it is what I mentioned earlier, this comment that Annie makes within the pitch itself about how
Right.
wouldn't the audience pity me? And here's what I find interesting about that pitch, and I think you see this in a couple of the other pitches. Like, is Jeff describing Annie's response? Because if so, what I like about this is the idea that even within Jeff's fantasy pitch, where he's desperately trying to keep everyone there, characters are resisting. Like, Annie is immediately resisting this, even within his fantasy. And we see this repeatedly throughout the show, the idea that Annie's at times rejecting the pitch, even within the fantasy world of the pitch itself. And again, I think this is an important reminder, and I think we see this consistently with a lot of these pitches, the lack of control that the creators have once they start to build these creative worlds. And again, just this consistent reminder that if you're deferring to figures like Harmon, you probably shouldn't, because one of the points it seems this episode wants to make is he doesn't have as much control as we want to think, and no creator does. So when we defer to these authorial figures, all we're really asking is, well, someone tell me the answer so that I don't have to think about this. But I like that in Jeff's pitch, the idea that like Annie's resisting from the very beginning. That's really clever and interesting to me.
Yeah, I also like read it as maybe subconsciously in the back of Jeff's mind, he knows that this is probably not going to work. And maybe if I read it that way, then his very last pitch I don't hate as much.
Yeah.
Because he's understanding like this is like a wish land, this is like a dreamland scenario. So yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you, but I also think that that could subconsciously be the voice at the very back of his mind saying, you can't keep people here,
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is before we find out that Abed's leaving as well. So Jeff makes the pitch, and then Abed says something along the lines of, I can't remember how it plays out, where Abed essentially feeds Jeff the idea to come up with this perfect scenario for season 7.
That's his. Well, so his third pitch is one that it's funny because I think they make reference to Scrubs. It feels like a premise. It feels like the premise for the final season of Scrubs, where and I think Abed even describes it as a kind of monstrous, like a monstrous contrivance. The idea that Britta is the school psychiatrist.
Yeah.
Annie's teaching criminality or criminal law or criminal justice. Abed's teaching like TV media studies. I guess what the dean's taking dean classes. And
because Jeff's the dean in his...
And Jeff is the dean in this. Yeah. And Annie has reverted back to original Annie in this fantasy pitch. So
and then when we cut back to real life, Annie says something like, I do like, I think it would be nice to teach her, and also like I like original Annie, but also that's when we get the full break of Abed saying, well, I'm leaving also. And then we get a pitch right after that of Jeff choking a bunch of Abeds,
killing
everyone around the table has just become Abed.
Yeah.
Jeff's losing it. Jeff starts to lose his mind a little bit.
I mean, I think we could talk about each one. The way Annie, I don't have the line here, but the way she describes this, that she's wearing original Annie's clothing, but she's more mature, but she's still hot, but not hot in a way that feels predatory. All of this, again, sounds like Jeff also trying to do something that Abed does with his pitch, trying to recapture something, but package it in a way that still feels digestible to an audience and doesn't feel, let us say, creepy and exploitative. But I also think, like, as you said, the pitch that immediately follows is one where Jeff is choking the life out of Abed, which makes a kind of sense to me because, like, doesn't the third pitch feel like something Abed from the past would try, or it feels like something that a different, maybe less mature version of Abed would want. And I don't know, like, you could imagine, especially after hearing that Abed's leaving, that Jeff at that moment sees Abed as someone who has infected him with something. That because we hear that same line repeated throughout, that I know you like to see things through that meta lens, or it's comfortable to see things through that meta lens. I don't know, John. I find the fourth pitch, as short as it is, the most interesting.
Yeah.
Simply because it's Jeff reckoning with the effect that Abed has clearly had on him. And
I wrote it that way too. But what's interesting, and we'll get to what I think is fascinating about Jeff as a character and why he's thinking these things. But I think, so this is the pitch before he does the pitch where he's leading a new study group. And the new study group consists of, like, Leonard and Garrett.
That's the first pitch. I'm sorry.
And Vicky Todd is trying to, like, Todd's a serial killer, essentially, because we find out he flushes a head down a sink.
Or is that Jeff's sixth? Like, okay, so I think
it's a lot. There's a lot.
It's well, because at one point, like, Jeff, he does have this really dour fantasy, or maybe it's less of a pitch and more of like a horror fantasy where he's left alone with all of the B and C characters. And I think you're right. Todd even says at one moment, we'll have all of these wacky adventures until we leave you behind as well. I think that was actually Jeff's original pitch, but it was less of a pitch and more of a fantasy.
I literally just watched the episode, and I don't.
Yeah,
remember,
I always
happening.
Because at one point, like, one of Jeff's fantasies or pitches is him and Annie in a domestic space. And I think that's the fifth pitch, when she even says, because I think this is yet another moment where even within his fantasies, his subjects are rebelling. Annie even asks, do you even know what I want? And he doesn't, which is, boy, I don't know, John, you can tell me what you think about this, because I think this is the moment, this is what we see moments before Jeff and Annie have that moment in the study room. What do you think of the idea that Jeff has finally confronted the truth that he doesn't really know Annie that well?
I think that's brilliant, by the way. And again, I think that's just a little voice in his head and I think that's what the final pitch shows, is that Jeff ultimately, he's in love with Annie maybe as a friend, and also that she's just incredibly attractive to him. But I also think that there's still a part of him that's, like, a bit slimy, that just wants to be with the most attractive person he can be with. And so maybe that's why he sees the Annie fantasy playing out. But I thought that up until the moment in the study room. And in the study room, they have this moment where she's saying goodbye to him, and she's asking, like, you know, what do you want, basically. And Jeff, at that point, just lets loose with the fears he has. And the biggest fear is that number one is he's not young anymore, and he's realizing it. And he also feels like he's just wasted potential. And I think the reason that he likes Annie is because if he were to be with Annie, and I know people like this in real life, if he were to be with Annie, he would be with someone who's younger, and that would make him not feel the way he is, his age, where he's at in life, his station in life. I think if he could have Annie, he would say, okay, I've got a young girlfriend, because we find out she's 20-something, late 20s in this. He even states at the beginning, he even states, I want to be 25 and not care about, you know, whatever. And I think ultimately, like, Jeff fears the group leaving, but Jeff fears more than anything that they're doing what he didn't get to do. And so I don't think it's a fear so much by the end that it is, like, insane jealousy. So I think that's why when we see the final pitch, which I think is still sort of out of place, I think at that point Jeff has, like, come to terms with who he is.
Yeah.
And that will let him keep some semblance of happiness, even though it's, like the frat boy sense of happiness. But I think that's ultimately to a T like who Jeff is at that point.
And I want to talk about that because I also want to talk about the end of the episode and how, again, this show wants to remind us that Jeff is actually not the hero here. And just, John, beautifully said, by the way. But I also think that moment in the study room, it's clarifying because it also gives us a sense of potentially who Jeff has always been to Annie. And this idea that both of them have been these fantasy objects to one another. And the funny thing about fantasy, John, at least understood from a psychoanalytic perspective, fantasies are only fantasies because of their lack of proximity, which is to say, when you don't have a thing or cannot have a thing, that's when it's the most engaging to you. And that is also when it's a thing that you potentially least understand because it's something that you don't have access to. It's something with a lack of proximity in a lot of ways. Because for Jeff, I think you're absolutely right. There is something about youth, but I think there's also something about youth and possibilities that he seems to conflate when he shares what he shares with Annie. But I think also to have a sense of what Jeff has maybe always meant to Annie, he's someone who's older and stable relative to who Annie has always been. Someone who I think the show has maybe not always been great about disclosing this or exploring it. Annie's always been someone who has existed in a kind of precarity, as someone who is a recovering drug addict, as someone who hasn't had the kind of familial support that maybe someone like Britta has had, despite the ways Britta has rejected all of that. I think Jeff has always been a figure of stability for her and someone who could feel comfortable because he has all of these things in his past, whereas Annie doesn't have all of that. So that's maybe one of my favorite moments just of the show because it finally clarifies what these characters are to one another as fantasy objects. And I like it because it's not that they misread one another. I think they actually really understand what the other means to them. And it's not what the other actually is, but it's what they understand the other to be because of this lack of proximity, because of this lack of understanding that they have, it seems, willfully cultivated. Because, boy, again, John, especially when thinking about things like consumer goods, you'll never enjoy a consumer good as much as when you don't have it because of just the possibilities, right? Like think of all the possibilities it could be, but the moment you get it, well, all of those possibilities evaporate because then it just becomes this thing with certain limitations. But when you don't have it, I don't know. It seems limitless, does it not?
Yeah, that's very well put. I totally agree with that. I think it's interesting to think that, and I wonder, like in that moment, in Annie's brain when Jeff's mask slips, because for most of the show, and I think it's the best when Jeff doesn't have it all together. I think that's when we really get the best version of Jeff, but his mask really slips a lot in the study room when it's just those two, when it's just them two. And he, I think he shows like he still deals with vanity to a degree that I don't think people really got. And not just like looks, but am I worth anything, now that I'm this age? And age is so important to him. I haven't succeeded how I want. Yeah, I would love to like be in that moment because I think that when Annie says you should kiss me goodbye, I read it a few ways. The first is like the two, like they love each other and they're sharing this, moment. But I also read it as deep pity that she has for Jeff as a character. Mm-hmm. And that could be wrong. I don't know if it is, but I think there's like a hint of that. I think at that moment when he says all these things, I think Annie realizes, oh, so this, if I do this, Jeff will probably have a much better summer than if I don't do this. I think there's a hint of that there.
Yeah, it's beautifully performed by both of these actors because, John, when Jeff is about to kiss her, the camera pushes in a little bit. Alison Brie does this thing where she doesn't look at him. I agree with you, just to be clear. I think part of it, like the way she initially says it, she says it in this flirtatious way, like, I'll regret it for a week. I'm in my 20s. Who cares?
Yeah.
She's really flirtatious in that moment. But John, right before Jeff kisses her, she does this thing with her face where it almost feels like, I think pity is the right way to read it, but maybe not pitying him, but having pity for what they could have been, I suppose. And like finally reckoning with these feelings she's always had. And all of those conflicted feelings, like, just bundled into this one moment. Because, John, she has this look, like, you can go back and watch it. It's not the look. It's not the look you give someone when you feel nothing but pity toward them. But I agree with you. I think that's part of it. Is I want to give this person something. Yeah. But I think we would be remiss if we didn't also acknowledge that Annie's getting something out of this too. And
oh yeah,
she's getting. Jeff is giving her something that maybe she just desperately wants, even if maybe. Well, I don't know. If she shouldn't want it, she might later realize this would be horribly misguided, the two of us together. But I think Jeff even has that moment when he says, we want what we want, whether it's logical or not, or whether it's reasonable or not, or whether it's a good idea or not. We just want what we want. And I think in that moment, he was not just speaking of himself and about himself, but he was probably speaking of and about Annie. This idea that, again, we're not as logical as we would hope to be, right? And so much of what we want is deeply maybe illogical, self-destructive, etc. But I think, Annie, she creates an interesting Trojan horse where she gets to give Jeff this thing, but she's also getting something from it too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that scene in particular shows the vulnerability of Jeff as a character, but I also think it shows like how fully in command Annie can be when she wants to be, and not for like nefarious means. I think she, in that situation, Jeff is not in command of that as much as we want to see like the tall, hulking man be. He's not. He's a very vulnerable. Sad person in that moment. So anyway, and then the fart hug happens. I don't care about it.
Let's just pretend in my head canon that didn't happen. So
before we talk about the airport thing, which I know you want to, let's talk about Abed's little speech that he gives about the finale. If you want to read that.
Yeah. So he says. There is skill to it. More importantly, it has to be joyful, effortless fun. TV defeats its own purpose when it's pushing an agenda or trying to defeat other TV or being proud or ashamed of itself for existing. It's TV, it's comfort. It's a friend you've known so well. And for so long, you just let it be with you, and it needs to be okay for it to have a bad day or to phone in a day, and it needs to be okay for it to get on a boat with LeVar Burton and never come back, because eventually it all will. Thoughts?
It's quite good. It's a very I think it wraps up exactly what a finale should be and what a show in general should be. And we've talked a lot, and you've mentioned it before, about Kelsey Grammer speaking on Frasier and how a majority of Frasier is not going to be the best thing in the world. It's just something you have to put out there. I think for me, and I have shows where I refuse to watch the finale because I, in my brain, don't want them to end. So I think this hits pretty hard for me. When I was younger, I was obsessed with the show Northern Exposure. I thought that show was so great in my young days. And I would watch every episode except the last one because I did not want the show to end. And I'm sure there are people that have shows like that now. I think I don't even watch the last season of Seinfeld because of how much I love that show. And it's always in my head. Like, if I had a syndication channel, that's like in my syndication channel. That and like Faulty Towers and other, shows like that. But yeah, I think it's important. I'm interested to know what you think about that last phrase and how you read it. And what did you think about it overall?
Well, I think I would agree with you, just to echo what you said, that the Kelsey Grammer 1/3 principle is, and just the idea, like, again, TV can be bad, and I like that. I like the idea that some episodes, and I think this is something that you and I have discovered at times while doing this podcast, especially with those Arrested Development episodes, that like some episodes are just, they're just fine,
Yeah.
they're just, like, they're just, solid, like, B- episodes, because sometimes it's okay just to have a solid B- episode. But I think Abed's really maybe articulating this idea that TV is about flux and instability. And that's something that I really like as well. The idea that art objects are rarely these stable things. They're these things. This is something that Andrew and I talk about a lot on the Cluttered Desk. The idea that flux and instability is the best way to really think about your favorite things, especially art objects. That they're rarely, like, anytime you think of them as these stable things, you're really just mapping a narrative onto something that's wildly unstable. I was having a conversation with a student a couple of days ago about the construction of the Bible as a text, and the some of the things she was discussing, John, was how, well, she was sounding a bit conspiratorial, but she was basically suggesting that these shadowy forces had like removed certain texts and
God.
really created all of this instability. And John, and instead of engaging with all of those points, all I said was, it's interesting how the way you're thinking about this implies that the Bible at some point was a stable text. And that's just not true. It's always been deeply unstable as a text. Yeah. And it's always been a text in flux. And I think that's the best way to think about TV as just a medium. Is it's a medium that really embraces flux and instability. And if that's what Community leaves us with, I really like it, because anytime someone gestures towards, well, it was better when it was this, what are they really saying? They're just mapping a stable narrative onto something that's always been unstable. And again, TV bears witness to instability. Even if all you do is just study it as an expression of like a production. How, like, I wonder if this show ever felt as stable as people want to think that it is or was, because that's just not true. And so, like, let's embrace flux, let's embrace instability, let's embrace uncertainty. And I think TV is a great way to get to those ideas.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, and it's interesting because when we started the podcast 8 years ago, Jesus Christ almighty,
it's been a
long time.
Yeah.
I can remember, I said we should do a podcast about Arrested Development. And that is a show that really bonded us as friends and really, like, grounded what our humor was going to be like. And I love that. And I think we both went into it with these, like, rose-tinted glasses, especially season 1, which I would argue is like one of the best seasons of a television show. And then when we got to season 3, I remember both of us having, like, super hesitation about what was happening in the show. And in my younger days when I would watch it, that never would register. I would I would never have any sort of like pause about it. I would always think, oh, this is perfect. You know.
Well, even moments in
But-
season 2, like I think you and I like if Arrested Development is perfect, it's really just the first 13 episodes of season 1.
Yeah.
Like there are episodes in seasons 1 and 2 that are not perfect and
Yeah.
are not as stable as I think, again, like you and I had always thought they were.
Yeah, and I think, excuse me, I think watching that show and having those moments made me appreciate the show way more. And I think the same thing with Twin Peaks. You know, Twin Peaks is like season 1, arguably one of the best seasons of television. Season 2 becomes like this roller coaster of
Wild.
insanity.
Insane.
You know, it's like the most fucking wild thing.
Yeah.
But being able to look at it and talk about it as and like talking about what's happening in production, what's happening contextually, you know, it's great. And I think that's what makes TV so phenomenal. And here, and it's sad to say, like, I think the podcast really hit its stride when we started talking about season 4 of Community. I think like we really fell into this great groove, and that was like and I have such fond memories of talking about it because that really made me appreciate this podcast and also like the art of speaking about bad TV, because it's like the art of speaking about it, and the art of making it, because there is so much love behind it. And you know, when people are making it, they don't think it's bad, and maybe they do. And that's even more interesting. And I think like that's great for Abed to really state, like, there's a lot of give and take, and you can only do what you can do, and no matter what, it's not going to be perfect. And I think, but in saying that, like, it is perfect because you get to just discuss this insane moment, these insane choices, the stories. Like, it's great. And I think if a show was just perfect all the way through, it would be quite boring towards the end. You know, I don't think I'd really want to even talk about it.
Yeah. Well, I think just to, in particular, that point about, like, there's no way that whether it's actors, producers, directors, whether it's TV or movies, there's no way they always think it's good. Like, I heard Matt Damon talk about this, where he said one of the more, and you know, he was being self-deprecating. He said one of the more, but it's definitely happened more than once, like, instructive moments in my career as an actor is when I realized, oh God, I'm in the middle of making a terrible movie.
Yeah, right.
And like he said, it's super instructive because, like, you can't just then quit. Like, you have to go and do the work, even though you know, like, oh God, this will be such a bad movie. Like, you can't really say that to anyone. Maybe you can say it to some people, but you must, as an actor, operate under the assumption that and perform like it's not bad, while still knowing and like assuming, like, even if people like it, this is not good what we're doing here. And so I just there must have been those moments when they realized, like, I think the Community actors in particular have spoken about, like, instances with Chevy Chase where they knew that the work we're doing here is like, we're trying to do our best, but this is not good because this guy sucks. I know because Andrew and I have spoken a lot about X-Men recently, I have read a bit about how awful Bryan Singer was, and how I think it was in the middle of filming, like, maybe the second X-Men movie, all of the primary actors had to basically go to him and say, stop it. This sucks. Like, you're being the worst. Yeah. And like, X2 is a, like, phenomenal movie, but even within that moment, like, they didn't think they were doing their best work because of these production conditions. So I just, again, like, whether actors know it or not, directors, producers, DPs, whomever, any and everyone involved in the production of media like this, there must be these moments when they know, like, this is not good, guys. Like, this is not this is not our best, and what do we do with that?
And I think in those moments, like, those stories are way more fun for me to listen to
Sure.
than somebody who's like, oh, I was on a movie with such and such actor and he was phenomenal. Oh, really? Like,
Yeah.
because I listened to Joel McHale talk about how he had to like physically beat up Chevy Chase.
Yeah.
And I thought that's the dopest shit I've ever heard in my
Yeah.
life. And you know, I can't imagine the insanity that happened on this or any of the shows we've spoken about. And I think
Yeah.
shows that are fallible and address it are great. And
Yeah.
that's what Community gets right.
Yeah, but I would also say, like, I understand why certain actors probably, because, I mean, again, just thinking back to what Annie and Jeff discussed in the study room together, because I think that was an interesting moment where they're having obviously a conversation that makes sense within the diegesis, but it also feels like they're having like this non-diegetic conversation about how young female actors like Alison Brie can't say the sorts of things that like Joel McHale can say.
Yeah.
And that makes like that clarifies why Joel McHale can have these candid conversations about the things that Chevy Chase did, while Alison Brie probably cannot play that as fast and loose as he does, because she's a young female actor in an industry that has historically punished female actors, in particular young female actors, for saying the sorts of things that Joel McHale said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I when I watched it, I thought I could pick out. I think you can pick out the lines that Dan Harmon wrote because they're like so full of wild hubris. When they're having that conversation in the study room and they start poking fun at Marvel movies, you could tell that Harmon's like, "Why do these have an audience and I don't have an audience?" thing. But then that the end tags for sure. There's even like a moment where he's saying this show wasn't so bad, sort of thing, when in reality, like, I mean, the ratings are the ratings, and you have to deal with them. But he's even at the very end trying to like pull a "I told you so." I thought it was fascinating.
Well,
I thought it was
but
interesting.
even like his co-writer for this episode is Chris McKenna, who hasn't Chris McKenna written some of the, if not all of the Spider-Man Marvel
Yeah, he has.
movies? And
Yeah.
I don't know, like I'm trying to find. Yeah, okay, so I found it here on IMDb. So Spider-Man Homecoming was 2017. That wasn't that long after this episode. So it is interesting that, like, yeah, I because I agree with you, right? Like, sure, those jokes about Marvel feel like Dan Harmon jokes, but like Chris McKenna in theory is right beside him co-writing this episode, while at the very least in 2016, is he not in pre-production or
Oh, yeah.
or 2015? Is he not probably in pre-production for one of these Spider-Man movies? Yeah, so this was June 2nd, 2015. He's writing that Spider-Man movie, if not now. Like that flick's in pre-production at this point.
Yeah.
So
Get
like,
real
yeah.
mad until Disney waves a big check in your face.
Yeah.
Then you go, "Please, yes, I love Spider-Man."
Yeah. No,
Anyway, so let's talk
yeah,
about
yeah.
the actual ending of the show. I agree with you. The very end of the show for me is the airport sequence.
Yeah.
It's a very sweet sequence where, actually, we'll get there. But Jeff drops off Annie and Abed at the airport, and he hugs Annie first, which I thought was great because they've already had they've said their piece. Now he can move on. And Abed, he hugs Abed twice. And the first one's like your sort of like standard, you're going away hug. And the second one is one for Jeff. And I liked it because I think Jeff is acknowledging as best he can that Abed has changed his entire trajectory in his life at this point. So, yeah, I think it's a very sweet, wonderful moment. The only time I teared up was that. I thought it was great.
Every time I watch it, I cry every time because it's a fascinating mirror to really the opening of the pilot episode, where Jeff is desperately trying to shed this person. Like the after the dean's and I wish you luck speech, when we actually meet the principal characters for the first time, Jeff's walking away from Abed, and Abed he cannot shake him. But it's fascinating how the show ends with Jeff like desperately trying to keep him in some ways. Like the second hug is like, are you sure you want to go? Because you could just stay. But yeah, I agree with you. It is this interesting acknowledgement of like just how significant Abed has been, but also this moment where we're seeing the two characters that function as the genesis for this show. But here it's inverted in a beautiful poetic way. I don't know, like I think maybe the greatest filmmaker of the 20th century said, like good stories rhyme, so that's George Lucas. I'm kidding. That's a dumb thing.
No, I know who it is. I know who it is.
Yeah. That's a dumb thing
I fully get what you're saying.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Yeah. No, but I think like this is one of the times where like it rhymes in a way that actually works.
No, here's what you say. So one of my favorite filmmakers of all time is Sergio Leone. He directed The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which is one of the best movie. So fucking good. Yeah. But he if you have that film, you should watch the commentary because Richard Roper does the commentary on that. He's like a scholar of Leone. He talks about how Sergio Leone likes to shoot in circles. I love this. Yeah. So at the beginning of the movie, for no reason, like a dog runs into frame and runs out of frame. At the end of the film, when the film the film starts to end, the third act, a dog runs into frame and out of frame. The last bit of the movie is shot in a big circle. It's very operatic in how it moves. He likes to have beginnings and endings, quote unquote, rhyme. And so that's how I felt about this. Like the whole show is shot in a big circle. And it closes up great. And I think even after that, the show acknowledges that the fans need a warm hug. And so we get this very brief moment where Jeff goes to Britta's bar and he gets the drink and they cheers. And then I think maybe very quietly Chang says, "This is the show." And then
it's
that's
either
how
Chang or Britta. I think Britta says now this is the show. You see, like beautiful, yeah. Like your reference to rhyming is better than mine with Lucas and the Phantom Menace. But like John, it's funny because I was thinking of a movie like There Will Be Blood because it's a fascinating movie because the movie. PTA does this thing where the movie could end with Daniel Plainview's son because so the movie ends with Daniel Day-Lewis character. He and his son have this confrontation, and his son leaves, and we actually like the camera frames his son leaving, and you could imagine the movie ending there with his son as the actual hero. But it doesn't. It actually lingers. And that's what I thought was interesting about the end of this episode, how the camera lingers. The camera doesn't follow Abed and Annie, who are ostensibly, I mean, like, I think you could make an argument that they're actually the real heroes because they're leaving, along with Troy, right? The idea that, like, the original three from the apartment have now left. But the camera lingers with Jeff. And I think what's interesting in There Will Be Blood, it lingers with a character who isn't the hero, which is not how many movies end. The movie ends with the hero, like, leaving or departing. The movie, like, the camera frames the hero, and we're meant to see the story not only from the hero's perspective, but with the hero. But PTA doesn't do that. And I think this episode does something similar as a kind of reminder that Jeff is not our hero. The camera stays with the character who isn't actually the hero, even though the show has wanted us to think he's been the hero the whole time. The camera doesn't follow the actual heroes. It stays with a character who has framed himself as the hero, but has never actually been the hero. And it's Jeff.
It's because the whole show is cyclical. I think that's what we're getting from the outset, is that somewhere else in Greendale, there's another study group that is starting to emerge, and this whole thing is going to happen once again. That's That's the vibe I get. Because like that little moment in the bar, I like it a lot, but it feels like it was just studio notes. Like you got to give them something. You can't end on this Coldplay song or whatever. This sad moment. You can't end on that. You got to give them something.
But it's interesting because again, you could envision this not feeling sad if the camera followed Abed and Annie. That would feel triumphant, because that would feel that would feel like, again, the heroes doing the things we want our heroes to do, which is to seek new adventures and to not retreat back into what they've always been. But the camera chooses not to do that. I think I would actually say deliberately, as, again, maybe not a reminder, but as a final punctuation mark on this point that Jeff has never been the hero of this story, in the same way that Daniel Plainview is not the hero of There Will Be Blood, and PTA accentuates that at the end by not following the actual hero with his camera. And so that's what I really dig about this. Again, a reminder that Jeff, even though, like, yeah, I agree with you, it feels nice seeing all of them together at the bar, but I think we almost have to read against that saccharine feeling to imagine that, no, it's the show really suggesting that to stay here, while you and I have argued there is something liberatory about what Greendale does, it is an interesting way of potentially reminding us or articulating that Jeff is not actually the hero of this story. He's never been the hero of this story in the ways that maybe he wants to be.
There Will Be Blood does end with Daniel Plainview murdering a man with a bowling pin.
Well,
so.
sure. I mean, there are some obvious distinct differences. Yeah.
Because the whole point of There Will Be Blood is that Daniel Plainview cannot be shamed. He hates it more than anything. So he will spend his whole life to murder someone with a bowling pin. That movie fucking whips, by the way. Soundtrack's done by the bassist from Radiohead. Anyway, let's talk about the end tags quickly.
Please, go right ahead.
They're fine. My favorite part in them is the moment when the actor realizes he's stuck in like a liminal forever limbo space.
Oh, the placement of the camera is
perfect. You
perfect.
Stupid child to that kid. It's fucking great.
Dude, everything from the lighting, the shading, the placement of the camera, the way the card. Oh, yeah, no, it's perfect. You stupid child. It's just perfect.
Yeah.
It's a perfect frame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels like it feels a lot like a I Think You Should Leave sketch.
Yes. Right?
It really does.
Yeah.
The way it's filmed and everything.
Yeah.
And then we get this end tag of Dan Harmon gets the final word, which is, it starts out he's just reading like sort of the warnings of having a board game, and then it devolves into a spiel of a tortured artist who also is saying some very things that are not true whatsoever, but like,
I don't know.
The has tens of millions of viewers. That's not well.
Okay, yeah, maybe. I mean, that's debatable. I thought the part that was true. Again, using fiction as a way of framing the truth is like the idea that Harmon can only get to the truth through fiction. Like all of these things that he would love to say to people that okay, yeah. Like that feels true. So
yeah, I think, and also like I think is trying to have like an apology maybe for his behavior for some of those seasons. Yeah. Even though it comes off like it's humorous, but it's a funny show. But yeah, I don't know if I like this. I think I'd have been okay if the show had just ended with the and a movie tag, and then we move on to the credits. How do you feel about it?
Well, he even acknowledges, which I don't know, like, he calls it a vain Chuck Lorre-esque rant at the end.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know, that feels like one of the moments where, but if you call a thing you're doing for what it is and then keep doing it, are you really sorry? As I just said a moment ago, maybe the thing that I do like about it is how he seems to understand to some degree that maybe you can only arrive at certain truths through fictional framings. That like the idea that there's any way to arrive at a kind of unambiguous truth without some framing, without some fiction, without some mediation is impossible. And so I like the idea that he just leans into the notion that, no, you need mediation to get to the truth. And fiction is often that form of mediation that, well, even the stories we tell about ourselves take. So that's something that I actually do like about it. Yeah. Truth through fiction, truth through mediation. It's something that's never direct. It's always indirect and circuitous. That I think I really like.
That is our very long conversation about the final episode of Community.
This is a long one, boy. Oh, this is nice. I like this.
We've been talking a while. Yeah. This is all leading up. If you stayed, you're in the mid-credit sequence where we tease our next podcast, Bower Boys, starting in January 2025.
It would have
Every
been great
fucking
if we,
episode. I'm just kidding.
It would actually be great if we started it this year, since this is 2024.
Oh my God, you're right. It's perfect. It's perfect. It writes itself.
First episode, 24.
Yeah, mark it down on your calendar.
Coming to your calendars. Coming to your calendars. Yeah, that's
coming to your calendars.
These are
Anyway.
these are episodes that we're exclusively releasing as iPhone calendar events. That's it.
All right, moving to our segments, Colin. The Dean's List.
Yeah, John.
The final Dean's List.
Yeah. So who's your? I guess we can do like Dean's List for this episode and like valedictorian for the season. So John, Dean's List for this episode.
I almost started singing the "Hail to the Chief" song because I forgot the graduation song. Dean's List this episode. I think Jeff. He's quite good. He goes through the gamut of a lot of different emotions. And I enjoy him a lot in this episode. What about you?
Yeah, I think Jeff is a great choice for this. I think he's the natural choice for this episode. But John, valedictorian, who's your best performance for the season?
That's why I haven't even thought about this.
Oh God.
Fuck, dude. I don't know. I like Elroy a lot. I think Elroy made the season for me. He's just so fucking good. I think I'm gonna say Elroy. What about you?
Yeah, I think mine's Frankie. Really, I love Frankie so much. She's so
She's great.
Isn't it crazy that and maybe this says more about the idea that the show probably needed to end after 6 seasons. That our favorite performances for the seasons were that our favorite performances for this season were both new characters. So.
Yeah. I think they both breathe the right amount of fresh air that we needed. For the show. What's the other thing we do? The syllabus one.
John, I know it's final exams week, which is true for me as well. I just administered my final exam for the semester as we're recording this. So I'm close to ending my semester. But John, what is your favorite bit of metatextual referencing and intertextual play?
Oh, I don't know. I don't. Oh God, everything behind me just fell. Oh my God, what was that?
I actually heard that.
What happened? Something fell down.
Oh God! This is like the time that I think I destroyed one of your figurines when we were.
You did. One of my toys fell because of how epic this episode is. I don't know if I can even think of anything. What do you have? Maybe that'll help me.
I mean, I don't know, like the Marvel references. I think this is something we always
I think I was going to go with that. I don't know if it's my favorite, but I get what they're saying. We've talked about that at length a couple episodes back. That's fine. What else. Who cares? That's fine.
Yeah.
Anyway.
John, best lines. Do you have any?
Oh, I don't. The best line is the "you stupid child" line. That's the only. That's
good.
The best line.
I have that one.
Go ahead. Hit me with yours.
How about nipple dippers? That's an Elroy line. Very funny.
It's great.
Jeff has this great line about Abed. He says, "Don't put a nickel in him." That was really funny. This is something Chang says. Lizard, fire hydrant, Obama, Chang.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Placeholder lines. I mean, no offense or anything, but isn't the shape of your brain kind of fucked up? I don't know why I like that line so much, but I do. Okay, this is again a Dean line. Well, I mean, they sit wherever they want to sit as of the 1960s. So okay, this is
a delivery.
Oh God,
so good.
This is the within the Frankie pitch. hello. And then everyone says hello. And then Frankie says, hello. And then Jeff says, how's everyone? And Britta says, hello. And then Chang's fart, and then so on. Okay, this is a Frankie line in Jeff's deeply contrived pitch. By the way, I'm a lesbian. It's why I haven't hit on Jeff. He can't let this
solved
thing
that mystery.
go. Yeah. And then finally, you stupid child, nobody's winning anything.
Yeah. So good. We also should say that the ass crack bandit turned out to be Annie, in case you're wondering.
Basically, I think that's what, for reasons that only Annie, ironically enough, could psychologically profile. Well, John, that is our conversation for Season 6, Episode 13 of Community, Emotional Consequences of Broadcast Television. John, I mean, we have a Patreon page, you know?
Yeah, we have a fucking Patreon.
Like the
If you wanna-
mall's,
if you
the
wanna head
mall's
on over
closing, but everyone keeps coming into the store. I don't get it.
Yeah, we're trying to shut this bitch up, and people keep coming on in. No, thank you though. If you want to listen to the spicy content, I think we might keep it around for a couple months so you can get your fill. It's $3 a month to hear all the exclusive content, and then $7 get you a sticker. Above that, you can become producer of the show, which you can hear us talk about you for 2 more episodes on this fucking thing.
Yeah.
And then above that, you get a shirt, and then above that, I don't know. The show's almost over, so it's got to be something cool. We'll go to Dollywood. That sounds pretty fun.
Yeah, John, thank you to the following producers. We have so many producers now. This is, I mean, I'm being serious. Incredibly flattering and charming that we have so many producers. This is wonderful.
Love it.
Yeah. Thank you to John, Ira, Anthony, Katana, Crindy, Rachel, Kate, Daniel, Rob, Robin, Rob, Jeff, Andrew. Oh, and Andrew. The list is so long. I don't even know.
Oh
mind blown. Yeah, no, John's right. Patreon link, it's in the show notes. Threadless link, it's in the show notes. John, if someone wanted to rate and review the podcast, what would you say? What would I say?
Well, I would read your review here on the air. We don't have much time left for it. So this is a review we got. It's a 5-star review. It just came in.
New
hot
review.
and fresh out the kitchen.
Hot, fresh. Where
The
those
title of this
oven
is just
mitts?
wonderful.
It's so hot.
It's by a guy. It's by a person. Excuse me, a company maybe. Esteban podcast review. What a name.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean that they just review podcasts? Maybe they have a podcast reviewing podcasts. That's an idea. That's $1 million idea. I don't care who you are. Esteban Podcast Review, thank you so much for this review. It says, I just discovered this podcast, and I'm really enjoying it. I just started rewatching seasons 4 and 5 of Arrested Development, and found this show to be a great companion piece. Well done. Thank you. I'm sorry for how much anger we have in season 5. It's a lot. Also, do not watch what's the re-edited one called?
Oh, Fateful Consequences.
That one's bad.
I think
we
that's
didn't
the
like
only
many
one
of those.
I think that's the only one that's available now.
That sucks.
Yeah, I agree.
God damn you, Netflix.
I think you and I really like the Rashomon approach to the original 4th season, but I think we might be in a vocal minority at this point. But John, please rate, review the podcast. We would love that. John, I'm trying to think, is there anything else I do here at the end? I think this is basically it, right?
I think that's it. I don't have much to. Oh shit!
Yeah, schedule. Like what's our plans now that we finish Community?
What the fuck, though? So we're gonna have 2 more episodes this month, and the second of those 2 will be the last episode. But then this month we'll do like a fun Patreon, and then next month we'll probably do a Patreon that's like a more sad Patreon, a more not like we're gonna watch a sad movie. No, a more like introspective Patreon. I'll say.
And I think what we were thinking of doing as well was Patreon episode for this month, the month of May. 2 final episodes reflecting on season, just all of Community, and another one maybe about the podcast itself. We haven't fully discussed or decided what to do. And then we were thinking like 2 maybe interesting, ambitious Patreon exclusives for the month of June. So yeah, I think that's the plan. So yeah.
So there you go. So if you want to hear a Patreon this month and then 2 next month, get over on the Patreon. Hit us up. Let us know. Also, a little news here at the end. If you've made it this far, I will be resurrecting a show called Ride Along with
It's coming back?
a gentleman
Good.
named Rob. Yes, it will be coming back.
I'm so
I've started working
excited.
on the art for it, so that will probably be weekly, so 2 episodes a month.
I'm excited.
And if it gets a lot of push, we might do a Patreon. Who knows? But that will be happening as the crow flies, as we wrap. Probably like August-ish, we'll have ride along episodes coming.
I always
so.
loved Ride Along. I think the two of
Yeah,
you...
we did too. I missed it, and I wanted to make something. I don't get to make things with you. It's going to make me sad. So, Rob got second place. Rob is my silver medal. So you won gold, buddy.
Yeah, no, for those of you who have not listened to Ride Along, they don't just do like a quick review of a ride. I think the way the two of you would talk about like the narratives of a ride, this is something, dude, you would like this. I was actually talking to a student about this today in one of my classes because I used this word, and we've used this word as well on this podcast, this word text to describe like something you placed under a kind of critical or analytical scrutiny. And so he was asking like, is a movie a text? And I said, anything is a text. I said, like,
sure.
if you like roller coasters and you want to actually have a conversation about the experience of a particular ride, maybe depending on where you sit, you're treating it as a text at that point. And that's what I've always liked about Ride Along is you two treat these rides as texts, and it's always interesting to listen to.
Yeah. Yeah, we deep dive them. We talk about, the queue, everything. Mm-hmm. There's a lot that goes into it, so it's like a 30-minute listen. It's a lot of fun.
The history is super interesting as well. Yeah.
Yeah, the history. We talk about people die on it. It's always a good time. So that will be coming back. I will have more news as we get closer, but until then, there's more of this delicious Hop-Ons left. I think by the time we're done, we'll have 300 episodes on the feed.
That's what I was thinking too. Is we might get close
to
300.
That is fucking insane.
Yeah.
If we're only at 299, we have to record something else. We gotta go out of 300, huh?
Well, I mean, but we'll be back periodically, so we'll probably surpass 300 at some point.
That's true. That's true. Anyway,
I
love you, Colin. I love everybody here.
I love you
Are you
too,
playing
buddy.
the music this episode?
No, I'll save it.
We'll save it. We'll save it. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for listening. I'm going to bed now. Good night.
For the Hop-Ons podcast, my name is Colin Cox. He's
My name is
asleep.
Daniel Plainview.
Yes.
And I drink your milkshake.
Go get a milkshake. Yeah.
I'm finished.
It brings all the boys to the yard.